This video is brought to you by my patrons, my thoughts and opinions, Walt Disney, and a movie for kids that adult conservatives are weirdly fixated on. Hello, and welcome to, or back to, my channel. I'm Kit, and for the past, has it been 3 years now? Conservatives have been freaking out about Disney's live-action reimagining of their 1937 film, Snow White. Whether it's too diverse a cast or a lead actor Rachel Zegler making, controversial statements, they've been having a field day with this movie. And so, though I thought perhaps they might have run out of things to say, I felt obligated to go see it myself. And by this video's existence, you can see they did not actually run out of things to say, and so, let's get into it.
Hi-ho.
What did you say?
Oh, your uniform. Hi-ho. It's off to work you go.
I guess that makes me Snow White.
You must be on your way up to see Mopey.
How's he doing, Sleazy?
I'm not sure if you can spoil a fairy tale written over 200 years ago, but spoilers ahead. The 2025 version of Snow White opens with the main character being born during a snowstorm, which is how she got her name, to remind her of her resilience, and then we get a musical number of how the king and queen raised her to be fearless, fair, good, and true. And then the queen dies, and the evil queen appears, charms the king, and seemingly sends him to his death in war. She makes Snow White a servant, and that's how Snow White lives for several years, until a bandit, Jonathan, makes his way into the castle and steals some food. He's sentenced to freeze to death at the castle gates after Snow White makes a plea for fairness, and after Snow White frees him, she asks what it's like out there, which apparently puts her on the magic mirror's radar, so the next time the evil queen asks who the fairest is, a response was Snow White. So she sends the huntsman to take Snow White apple picking, but to kill her and bring back her heart. He instead orders her to run into the woods and never come back. The evil queen, of course, quickly finds out that Snow White is still alive, and sends her soldiers into the woods, but Snow White has befriended some bandits, led by Jonathan, and of course she befriended the dwarves as well, and the soldiers are outwitted. Undeterred, the evil queen drinks a potion to make her appear old and poisons an apple, which she gives to Snow White, who, of course, takes a bite and seemingly dies. In the meantime, Jonathan has been taken prisoner, but with the help of the huntsman, also in the dungeon, he breaks free and is led by the animals to Snow White's funeral? He kisses her, she comes back to life because true loves kiss, and they all go to defeat the evil queen, which they do by reminding the soldiers of their former lives, and the soldiers lay down their weapons. The evil queen flees to ask her mirror again who the fairest one of all is, to which the mirror answers Snow White because, you see, she's also beautiful inside. And the evil queen is so enraged, she smashes the mirror and consequently dies. Then there's a big celebration. Nothing notable, nothing really new, but conservative commentators sure are having a great time. I think my favorite is Michael Knowles thinking the fairest one of all refers to how white Snow White is.
So the obvious point, I don't even know, am I allowed to say it? She's not white, but she should be. Snow White needs to be white. I've been referring to this new movie as sand beige. She is a vaguely brown lady. I'm not white enough to be Snow White. I'm also a fella. But I'm not white enough to be Snow White either. She is Snow White because of her skin color. She's the fairest of them all. So you could even say, all right, the new movie, it's going to rewrite what Snow White means. And it's going to say that she's like snow because, you know, she's unique like a snowflake or because there was a snowstorm or whatever. But they kept in the, there's spoiler alerts, by the way. I should have said that earlier. They kept in the movie the line, mirror, mirror on the wall. They changed it to magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest of them all? And so you can try to abstract that again and say, well, she's really fair in that she's not unfair. You know, she's really fair-minded. But she's got to be white, okay?
Like, sure, fair can be said about skin or hair color. It can also be said about behavior. It can also be used as a measure of attractiveness. And if you're familiar with Snow White at all, you know it's the latter. It's not about who the whitest person in the land is. But thank you, Michael, for the amusement. Let's also appreciate how he was so dramatic, cannot even say this, and then he, and several others, whinge on about how Rachel Zegler just isn't white enough. So yes, Michael, you can say it, and you do several times. Anyway, there were a few other weird takes. Please enjoy.
I mean, everybody hates this. Why? Because they also cram progressive politics into it, if you can believe it.
The prince shows up again, and just by the way that he runs and carries himself, it seemed like he wanted to find a prince.
This was really bad. It was extremely leftist on every political dimension. Racial politics, sexual politics, class politics, regime politics. Its narrative was cowardly. It was just awful.
As her father and mother are king and queen to a utopian communist society. I'm not joking, guys. Now, they sort of communicate this in a very childlike way. They say things like, we will always keep in mind that what's mine is always yours. Those who tend to the land own its bounty. And Snow White has these utopian communist sensibilities that if she could only get in power and do it right, she will do it right, and she will share all the resources evenly, and we will have equity. Love that word. And Snow White says, no. I love this revolutionary. No, she doesn't love him at this moment because a feminist could never love a man so quickly.
This movie was like you took the original Snow White and just put everything through this filter of liberalism. It wasn't through a filter of Japanese anime, it was through a filter of liberalism. So from the casting to the class politics, the sexual politics, the regime politics, everything about it was liberal. The most obvious difference being, and I don't know if we're allowed, can we point out that Snow White is generally understood to be a very, very white person.
She is not Caucasian. She is a Latina. She is half Colombian. And so people were like, why were you cast in the first place? We just had a black Little Mermaid. Now we're having a Latina Snow White, and she's literally called Snow White. This doesn't make sense.
You've got crazy racial politics in the new Snow White movie. You've got crazy sexual politics in the new Snow White movie. And when I say crazy, I don't just mean offensive or subjectively unpleasant. I mean untethered from reality. Snow White isn't white. The political resolution of the movie is that democracy triumphs over monarchy. That is not present in the original movie. That is not present in the Grimm fairy tale. That is a radical, liberal rewriting of the story. As long as you're good at shaking hands and kissing babies, you'll be able to lead an insurrection against the queen.
Fun fact, you can be white and Latino. Would Michael object to Alexis Bledel in the role? Anyway, I don't think not falling in love with a stranger whose name you don't even know is a feminist thing. I think most people don't do that, but anyway, yes, you guessed it. The problem with Snow White is communism and feminism. These folks are really, really reading deep into a kid's movie. And they're also conflating liberalism with communism. Do they know what either of these things are? Liberals are not communists. But something I appreciate about Michael Knowles and Amala Ekpunobi is that they at least attempt to explain what they're talking about instead of, oh, I don't know, just reading reviews and saying, oh, it's bad because it's woke. So first, what made Snow White communist?
This entire story is an allegory for the effectiveness of communism when it's done right. It's essentially what they're saying. We start off in this utopian society where everybody's sharing and everything is equitable and everything is inclusive and our population is immensely diverse. There's a person from every race, every background, every age that lives in this utopian communist community. And then the evil queen comes and takes all the resources and keeps them to herself, which we know is actual communism. But the writers of this movie are clearly not aware of that.
They replace the prince with a common criminal. So there is a prince-like figure, but he's no longer a prince. He's a criminal. And I think this plays first into the class politics of the left, which hates even the very idea of aristocracy or nobility. It's about a kingdom. You know, she's a princess. Her father is a king. She's inheriting a kingdom. Here, they've kept the minimum amount of kingliness that you possibly can to maintain the story, but they've replaced all of those elements with lowercase d democratic elements. So the way that she wins over the kingdom is not by taking her rightful throne, it's by flattering the guards who are trying to kill her. It's basically by being a good retail politician. The fact that she can shake hands and kiss babies is how she does it. The way that she defeats the queen is not through some deus ex machina, as in the original movie, and it's not through any kind of orderly politics. It's by effectively leading an insurrection of the mob of people to go in and push her out. Every deviation from the original story was done for a reason. I guess what's so tedious about this movie is that every single deviation was in favor of liberalism, and a radical kind of liberalism at that. So it just takes a beloved movie and makes it much more boring and much less realistic, kind of like Society on Liberalism.
So we need hierarchy to make society interesting? Anyway, I have to admit that when I saw the opening scenes, when I saw the prince figure was a bandit, I knew there was going to be cries of communism. And these commentators apparently never wondered how communists would view royalty. But it's very weird that they're so concerned about diversity in a fairy tale. And what we saw in the film was feudalism. That the king and queen were nice doesn't change that. Also, Michael is very upset that no one kills the evil queen. She just gets sucked into her mirror. He calls this narrative cowardice, and was he really expecting Snow White to stab her? In the Grimm fairy tale, the evil queen dances to death in red-hot slippers. In the original Disney Snow White, the evil queen falls off a cliff. And in my favorite version, with Diana Rigg and Sarah Patterson, the evil queen also smashes her mirror and dies, though it's due to aging rapidly. All this to say, there's so many different endings to Snow White, I don't know why he's so upset about this version. Also, I think it was supposed to be an allusion to how vain she was and it destroyed her in the end, but anyway, what made Snow White feminist?
The change in the new movie is she just decides to take a nap. And if that is not the depiction of modern feminism, I don't know what is. You don't have to contribute anything. You're perfect just the way you are. You're entitled to everything in the world. You're going to be a girl boss. She does become a girl boss in as much as when the dwarves wake her up, she just bosses them around and tells them to clean the home. The lady, this beautiful, fair, beautiful princess, dainty, lovely princess, is physically fighting big, strong men in armor. Just preposterous.
Now, alongside the communist themes, there are feminist themes in this film. Snow White is constantly referred to as being born to lead and asked whether or not she can lead and step up to the plate and do what needs to be done. She's referred to as someone who does not need to be saved. When she's teaching the dwarves to clean their house, which in the 1937 version, we get this sort of whistle while you work, where Snow White cleans and bakes for them, and they do the same. And she sort of says, I'm going to stay in your house, but I will help you with all the different dynamics of hygiene and cleanliness and making good food for you. And she takes on that feminine role. Well, in this film, they reimagine Whistle While You Work, and Snow White essentially hands them the cleaning tools and is like, not only am I going to stay in your house, which I trespassed into and slept in one of your beds, but you guys are going to get up and clean this shit up. And of course, lastly, on the feminist themes, none of the men in this movie are particularly helpful to Snow White. She is consistently the focal point that is leading the story along, which makes sense, but she's also saving herself and saving everyone else at any given moment. And there's just this delusional tendency that modern day feminists have that if a woman is to be saved, it somehow makes her less strong.
I have finally figured out what makes something feminist and or girl boss. A woman doing anything for herself, showing any sort of agency. But you know, I don't remember Snow White engaging in any fights in the film, and it's interesting that though she spent years scrubbing the castle floors and probably other physical chores as well, Michael chooses to categorize her as dainty. And I'm not really surprised that a princess expecting to inherit a kingdom would be concerned about her ability to lead. And she's saved by a man many times throughout the film. Jonathan takes an arrow for her, it's Jonathan's kiss that awakens her, and the soldiers lay down their arms at the end instead of killing Snow White. Were we all watching the same movie? And, you know, despite Michael's whinging about narrative cowardice, I have no doubt that if Snow White had stabbed the evil queen when she was given the chance, he would have said she would never have done that, and that was feminist and unrealistic. I do appreciate, though, how Michael reduces feminism to the self-improvement section of a bookstore. Now, I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone watching that I do have opinions on the film, but before we switch gears a bit, I have a special treat for you all. Do you ever miss Classically Abby? Well, here's her brother, Ben Shapiro, doing a remarkable Abby impression.
I mean, that is it's such an amazing point, because the reality is that if you watch the original Snow White, it is a story between her and the dwarves about her actually civilizing the men. Right? She comes in and she cleans the house, but there's a whole number about how they haven't taken a bath in like a year, and she's going to force them to go and bathe so that they can then come in the house and eat while she makes the dinner. And this, by the way, is a trope in Hollywood films that stretches for a few decades, from the 30s to the 50s, where one of the ways that women affect men is by civilizing them, by requiring certain behavior of them. The movie Seven Brides for Seven Brothers comes to mind here. But that is no longer something that we're allowed to talk about, which, of course, is ridiculous, because men require civilization, and women have to sacrifice, and so do men, in order for there to be a relationship between women and men and for both of them to become better. But the idea in feminism is that there's nothing wrong with anyone the way that they are, except for men, who are naturally pigs, obviously.
If memory serves, Abby also used Seven Brides for Seven Brothers to illustrate how women civilize men. Uncanny, isn't it? And no, women don't have to sacrifice to civilize men, and feminists don't believe men are pigs. We believe men are humans who don't need a woman to make them behave. And if a man behaves badly, that doesn't mean a woman failed to civilize him.
Men don't need women in the same way that women need men. Men and women do different things because men and women are different. But this is part of that leveling impulse of liberalism that you're seeing on the sexual front, the racial front, the regime front, the class front, is this notion that we're all basically just indiscernible individuals. There's no difference in physical strength between this criminal, this outlaw, and a damsel, who was raised in a castle. There's no difference, but frankly, in stature between the dwarves and the tall people. It's all just kind of the same. And so this is why I say it makes it so tedious. One, we know that it's not true. So when we watch these scenes, we just don't believe them. But two, it just takes away the spice of life. There was a time when we said, vive la différence. There was a time when the left at least pretended to believe that diversity is our strength. But here you have just this bland homogeneity where I can't tell the difference between a prince and a criminal and a dwarf and a Snow White princess.
I don't believe for 1 second that Michael couldn't figure out who was who in this movie. Come on, man. Am I really supposed to believe that these two are so stupid they don't realize that treat everyone equally means you give everyone a basic courtesy? Is that really so hard for them to do? It's embarrassing watching these grown men whinge to thousands that they can't say slurs because that's what they really mean. They can't make jokes, they can't treat people different from them like shit without being called out for it, and they don't like it. These are grown men with children. Moving on, yes, I have seen Brett Cooper's new channel, and of course, she has some thoughts on the film.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah, the entire film's about a love story. It's about a love story because that's what the point of the film is. And I'm sorry that chivalry in a man pursuing you is now deemed as stalking, which now it's kind of making sense why men are opting out of the dating scene, because this is what they are hearing from women on social media. TLDR, the girls and the gays, we all want a man, we all dream about true love, so Disney, that is not outdated.
So, to be clear, Snow White is a kids' movie. And per Brett, it's also a love story. I thought kids were too young for that sort of thing. Or is it okay if the characters are straight and cis? But yes, Rachel Zegler is correct. Falling in love with someone you think is dead is indeed creepy, and if that puts men off dating, well. Anyway, Brett is also upset that Rachel doesn't express the proper reverence for the original, and just, does Brett know how many versions of Snow White have been made? Oh, and for anyone wondering, Brett did give an update on the Daily Wire Snow White, and she says that when you sign on as an actor, you're just contracted to show up and play a part. You have no control over anything else, and so no, she has no idea what's going on with the film. I'm thinking it's not happening, especially given Daily Wire's current troubles, and can anyone tell me if it's normal to film a trailer for a movie you haven't made? I think it's not, but I'm not in the entertainment business. Anyway, Brett is also very upset about the wokeness.
The son of one of the original 1937 Snow White creators and directors decided to speak out. And he had some choice words for Disney and this production, telling the Telegraph that his father and Walt Disney would be rolling in their graves because of what Disney was doing. And in covering this, they wrote, as details surrounding the 2024 Snow White remake emerge, Hale Hand told the Telegraph that he stands in strong opposition to the new movie. Quote, it is a whole different concept, which is true. They completely changed the story. Weird. And I just totally disagree with it, and I know my dad and Walt would also very much disagree with it, the 91-year-old said. There is no respect for what Disney did and what my dad did. I think Walt and he would be turning in their graves, he said. Hale Hand said that he would prefer if Disney's original animated films remained untouched, as we all would, calling the remake a, quote, disgrace for trying to do something new with something that was such a great success earlier. Quote, I'm afraid of what they're going to do with the earlier films. The company's thoughts are just so radical now. They change the stories, they change the thought processes of the characters, they just aren't the original stories anymore. They're making up new woke things, and I'm just not into any of that. And I love that this is a 91-year-old saying this. This 91-year-old should be at his retirement home relaxing, playing bingo, not thinking about his father, who is a certified Disney legend, not thinking about his father's legacy and the woke things that Disney is doing. I completely agree. I think most of us agreed with what he was saying. And how was any of this ever controversial? This is common sense.
Unfortunately, Brett doesn't go on to explain what was so radical and woke about this Snow White. And honestly, I don't think she actually watched it, she's just going off reviews. Which is a shame because I would really like to hear about the radical parts. Maybe I'm just too radical and that's why I was bored. Or I was an adult watching a kids movie. Well, regardless, despite all the power woke people apparently have, Brett crows that we're actually not that powerful. The enemy is both strong and weak, of course.
Like, I was actually walking around going, this is pretty great. Like, we, with all of our power, with our audience ammunition, we got them to stall this. We got them to go back and reshoot things. They are listening to us. They are actually listening and learning in the good way. Maybe this is huge. This is a win for audiences. But then,
I seriously doubt Brett, or anyone commenting on this film, actually cared that much about this movie that it was affecting their daily mood. Come on. Anyway, Brett reads reviews, which in my opinion is another indicator that she didn't see the movie, and weirdly says that legacy media, which should be, quote, salivating, waiting with bated breath to defend this production of Rachel Zegler, is struggling and... I'm sorry, but not everything is a political message, not everything is some sort of win or proof that something is bad. Sometimes a movie just isn't good. But I did get to have a little giggle.
I think all of us envisioned Snow White like the original, like the real Snow White.
She knows Snow White isn't real, right? Anyway, Brett doesn't like that Rachel was adding things like Free Palestine to promotional posts and, well...
But the fact of the matter is, she was involving politics into promotions. That is a major difference, and producers have a right to be concerned. They have a right to handle that. They are paying her millions upon millions of dollars to represent them and this film to act like Snow White. It is literally her job to embody that. And she wasn't. A person left a comment on one of his Instagram posts and said, "Your dad flew to New York City to reprimand a young actress. Any words on this? Because that's creepy as hell and uncalled for. People have the right to free speech. No, shame on your father." And then Jonah Platt, who is Mark Platt's son, he responded and he said, "You really want to do this? Yeah. My dad, the producer of an enormous piece of Disney IP with hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, had to leave his family to fly across the country to reprimand his 20-year-old employee for dragging her personal politics into the middle of promoting a movie for which she signed a multi-million-dollar contract to get paid and do publicity for." And that's a very important fact. When you are paid to do a movie, you are also paid after the fact to do the publicity, again, to play the part of the role that you were hired to play. This is called adult responsibility and accountability, and her actions clearly hurt the film's box office. Free speech does not mean that you are allowed to say whatever you want in your private employment without repercussions. Tens of thousands of people worked on that film, and she hijacked the conversation for her own immature desires at the risk of all of the colleagues and crew and the blue-collar workers who depend on that movie to be successful. Narcissism is not something to be coddled or encouraged. I mean, the man pulled no punches. That last line specifically, that is a mic drop moment. I think that we could just blast that everywhere for a bunch of different people in the world, that narcissism is not something to be coddled or encouraged. Again, I think half the country needs to hear that.
I'm going to need someone to explain to me how uttering support for a people currently undergoing a genocide is immature and narcissistic. I'm sure Disney would rather she not, but if Disney is so woke, so radical, shouldn't they be posting Free Palestine themselves? Huh, what a puzzle. But seriously, if Disney wanted to steer clear of politics and such during promotional tours, etc., they should have included that in her contract. Given that they don't seem to be suing her for breach of contract, I'm guessing they didn't for whatever reason. Personally, I think it's admirable of Rachel to use her large platform to bring attention to the genocide in Palestine. And by the way, it's very rare for crew members to receive residuals. So don't try to say that Rachel is selfishly affecting their paychecks. That is just not true. Final thoughts? I wanted to comment on this because my "the right is losing it about" videos tend to do really well, though we'll see if Snow White ranks up there with 4B in the election. I kind of hope not. And, well, I don't know who needs to hear this, but corporations don't care about us. If they did, they would be encouraging creativity and thinking outside the box instead of just doing lazy remakes to cash grab. And they would be supporting Rachel Zegler, not trying to shush her. Everything corporations do is performative. How many are rolling back their DEI initiatives? Because it was never about actual change or progress, but about the appearance of it. Anyway, let me know below. Do you like Snow White? Do you plan to see the film? Or did you already see it? And if so, what are your thoughts on it? My critique of Snow White is that it was bland. In their quest to appease everyone so they could boost those ticket sales, Disney created nothing. It felt shallow. The storyline progressed because it had to, not because it made sense. Nothing felt earned. But I suppose that's what happens when your main goal is to make money instead of creating a compelling story. Anyway, I'll leave some links to other reviews below, and that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.